The sirens were so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. I was standing in that same backyard where just 3 months earlier we'd toasted champagne and celebrated my niece's engagement. Except now there were police officers taking statements, and my brother's face had gone the color of old newspaper. He kept saying my name over and over, like if he just said it enough times I'd take it all back. But I was done taking things back. I was done pretending. And I was definitely done protecting him. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I thought I had it all figured out. At 62, I'd finally reached that stage where you're supposed to have peace, right? Where family gatherings are pleasant and predictable, where you know your place in the world. My brother James had always been the golden child, the one who went to business school, the one who took over managing things when Dad got too frail. I was the nurse, the caretaker, the one who showed up with casseroles and Band-Aids. That was my role, and I'd accepted it, or so I told myself. The engagement party was beautiful. My niece Sarah had strung fairy lights across the oak trees, and there were tables covered in linen that fluttered in the June breeze. I'd made my famous potato salad, the one Mom used to make, and I remember feeling this warmth in my chest, watching everyone laugh and eat. This was what family was supposed to be. This was worth all the headaches, all the nights I couldn't sleep, all the times I swallowed my words to keep the peace. James was holding court near the drink table, telling some story about a fishing trip with Dad from years ago. He had his arm around his wife Linda, and they looked so perfect together it almost hurt to look at them. I'd never married, never had kids. I told myself it was because I was too busy taking care of everyone else, but the truth was probably more complicated than that. The truth usually is. Sarah came up to me with her fiancé Marcus, both of them glowing in that way only people newly in love can glow. "Aunt Claire, thank you so much for being here," she said, hugging me tight. "You know you're my favorite." I laughed. "Don't let your dad hear you say that." "Oh, Dad knows," she said, rolling her eyes affectionately. "He knows you're the one who actually cares." Something about the way she said it stuck with me. The one who actually cares. Not the successful one, not the important one. The one who cares. The party wound down around 9, and I helped clean up like I always did. James was inside doing something on his phone, probably work stuff. He was always working, always busy with important matters I didn't fully understand. Estate management, he called it, making sure our parents' legacy was protected and distributed properly. Mom had passed 5 years ago, Dad just 18 months back. The grief was still fresh enough to sting. I was carrying a stack of paper plates to the trash when I heard James and Linda talking in the kitchen, their voices low but urgent. "We need to be more careful," Linda was saying. "If she ever actually looked at the statements—" "She won't," James cut her off. "Claire doesn't think about money. She never has. That's why this works." I froze. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the plates. That's why this works. What works? I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have marched in there right then and demanded to know what they meant. But you have to understand something about family dynamics, about roles we play for so long they become part of our identity. I was the peacekeeper, the one who didn't make waves, the one who trusted that everyone else knew better than me. So I went home that night and I didn't say a word. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the start of one of my headaches creeping up the base of my skull. I'd been getting them more and more frequently over the past few years. Stress headaches, my doctor called them. Just stress, nothing to worry about. Except now, I was worrying about everything. The next morning, I woke up with that conversation still playing on repeat in my mind. If she ever actually looked at the statements. Why would Linda say that? What statements? I'd signed papers when Dad died, sure, but James had explained them all to me. The trust was being managed properly, he'd said. Everything was fair and equal, he'd said. I was getting my share, he'd said. Was I, though? I started my day like I always did, making coffee in the same mug I'd used for 20 years, eating toast standing up at the counter. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week at the hospital, and today was supposed to be my day off. I'd planned to do laundry and maybe work in my tiny garden. Normal things. Safe things. Instead, I found myself digging through the filing cabinet in my spare room, looking for something I couldn't even name. I had copies of some documents from when Dad died, but not all of them. James had said he'd keep the important stuff at his office, where it would be safe, where I wouldn't have to worry about it, where I wouldn't see it, more like. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by old tax returns and medical bills and birthday cards I'd kept for reasons I couldn't explain, and I felt something shift inside me. It was subtle, like a door opening that I hadn't even known was locked. What if I'd been wrong? What if all this time, all these years of putting family first, of trusting that loyalty was more important than questions, what if I'd been protecting the wrong people? The headache was back, pounding now, but I ignored it. I'd gotten good at ignoring pain. Too good. Over the next few weeks, I tried to act normal, but it was getting harder. Every time I saw James at family dinners, every time he asked me how I was doing in that concerned big brother voice, I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake the truth out of him. But I didn't, because that wasn't who I was. That wasn't my place. You know that feeling when you start to question everything you thought you knew about your life? It's like vertigo, except instead of the room spinning, it's your entire reality. I'd catch myself staring at nothing, lost in thought, and then realize 20 minutes had passed. I stopped sleeping well. The headaches got worse. My coworker Susan asked me if I was okay, and I almost started crying right there in the break room. "I'm fine," I told her. "Just tired." It was easier than the truth. The truth was, I was starting to suspect that my own brother had been stealing from me. And I was too afraid to find out for sure, because that would mean everything I'd believed about family and loyalty and my place in the world was a lie. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like you were playing a character in a story written by someone who didn't really care what happened to you? That's what my life felt like in those weeks. I went through the motions. I smiled at the right times. I brought cookies to family events. I was good old Claire, reliable and uncomplicated and too trusting for her own good. But inside, I was screaming. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July when everything changed. I'd just gotten home from a particularly brutal shift at the hospital, where we'd lost a patient I'd really liked, this sweet older man who reminded me of Dad. I was emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and I just wanted to collapse on my couch and maybe cry a little. Instead, I saw the pile of mail I'd been ignoring, and something made me actually look through it instead of just tossing it on the table like I usually did. Bills, ads, a postcard from my cousin in Florida, and then, at the bottom of the stack, a bank statement. It wasn't even for the right account. It was clearly a mistake, something that had been misdirected. The address was similar to mine, but the account holder was listed as J. Patterson Estate Trust. My father's name had been John Patterson. James Patterson was the trustee. My hands were shaking again as I opened it. I'm not a financial person. Numbers have never been my thing. But even I could see that something was wrong. The account balance was much larger than I'd expected, and there were regular withdrawals labeled things like administrative fees and property management and trust distribution. Except I'd never received any distributions from this account. Not one. I sat down hard on my couch, the statement trembling in my hands. The room started to spin a little, and I had to close my eyes and breathe deeply through my nose. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The breathing technique they teach nurses to use during emergencies. Except this was my emergency, and no amount of controlled breathing was going to make this better. The numbers didn't lie. Over the past 5 years since Mom died, there had been hundreds of thousands of dollars moved through this account. Maybe more than that. The estate had been substantial. Dad had been a careful man, a saver, and he'd done well with some property investments. He'd always told me and James that we'd be taken care of, that we'd each get our fair share. But I'd never gotten anything except a small monthly payment that James called my stipend. About $2,000 a month, which I'd been grateful for. It helped with bills. I thought it was generous of James to make sure I was comfortable. Now, I was looking at withdrawals 10 times that amount, all going somewhere I couldn't track. All labeled with official-sounding categories that probably meant nothing. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick, like I might throw up right there on my coffee table. The headache that had been building all day suddenly exploded into a full-blown migraine, and I had to lie down on the floor because the couch felt too soft, too unstable. This is what betrayal feels like, I thought. This is what it feels like when your foundation crumbles. I don't know how long I lay there. Long enough for the sun to set. Long enough for my phone to ring twice, calls I didn't answer. Long enough for the initial shock to harden into something else. Something colder. My brother had been stealing from me. My own brother, the one I'd trusted completely. The one I'd defended to anyone who suggested he might be a little too controlling, a little too quick to take charge. He'd been taking what was rightfully mine, what Dad had wanted me to have, and he'd been counting on me being too passive, too trusting, too committed to keeping the peace to ever question him. And he'd been right. For years he'd been absolutely right, but not anymore. I pulled myself up off the floor, my head still pounding, and I made myself look at that statement again. Really look at it. I took pictures of every page with my phone, my hands steadier now despite the pain. Then I put it in a folder, and I put that folder in my safe deposit box the next day. Evidence. That's what this was. Evidence of something I couldn't quite name yet, but knew I needed to document. The thing about betrayal is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every interaction with James after that was colored by what I knew. When he hugged me at my nephew's baseball game the next weekend, I felt like I was hugging a stranger. When he asked me how I was doing, I heard the condescension underneath the concern. When he talked about taking care of the family legacy, I wanted to laugh in his face, but I didn't. Because I'd learned something important about myself in those weeks of suspicion and those few days of certainty. I'd learned that I was good at pretending. Really good. Years of being the peacekeeper had taught me how to smile when I wanted to scream, how to nod when I wanted to argue, how to swallow my truth to make everyone else comfortable. Now I was going to use those skills against him. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I listened when he talked about business. I asked casual questions about the estate. I mentioned that I'd been thinking about my retirement and wondered if there might be a way to access more of my inheritance. Each time, he had an answer ready. The market wasn't good right now. The properties were in transition. It was better to leave things as they were. Trust him. He knew what he was doing. And each time I smiled and nodded and hated him a little more. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that stung deeply. It was the realization of how long this had been going on, how calculated it all was. I started remembering conversations from years ago, innocuous moments that now felt sinister in hindsight. Like the time right after Dad's funeral when James had pulled me aside, put his hand on my shoulder in that brotherly way, and said, "Claire, I know this is overwhelming. Let me handle the financial stuff. You just focus on healing." I'd been so grateful. I'd hugged him and cried into his expensive suit jacket, thanking him for taking care of everything. He'd been setting me up even then, planning how to keep me in the dark. Or the Christmas 2 years ago when I'd mentioned wanting to take a pottery class but worrying about the cost. James had laughed, not unkindly, and said, "You know, sis, if you'd paid more attention to finances over the years, you wouldn't have to worry about little things like that." Linda had swatted his arm playfully, told him not to tease me, but I'd felt the sting of it. The implication that my financial struggles were my own fault, the result of my choices, my lack of business acumen. Never mind that I'd chosen a career in nursing, a profession of service and care. Never mind that I'd spent years helping Mom and Dad, taking time off work to drive them to appointments, staying overnight when they were sick, organizing their medications and managing their care. James had been busy with his important job, his important life. I'd been the one who'd shown up. And this was how he repaid me. I started a journal during those weeks. Nothing fancy, just a plain notebook where I documented everything. Dates, times, conversations, my observations of James's behavior. My therapist years ago had suggested journaling as a way to process my feelings about never getting married, never having my own family. I'd tried it for a while, but it had felt self-indulgent, a waste of time. Now it felt essential. Each entry was another piece of evidence, another data point in the pattern I was beginning to see clearly. July 15th, family barbecue at James and Linda's house. James mentioned the estate casually, said property values in Dad's old neighborhood were finally recovering. Asked him what he meant by finally. He changed the subject. Linda gave him a look I couldn't quite read. July 22nd. Ran into James at the grocery store. He seemed uncomfortable, rushed. Said he was busy with estate paperwork, some legal requirement about annual filings. I asked if I needed to sign anything. He said no, he had it handled. When I pressed, asking if I could at least see the documents, he got irritated. Said I needed to trust him, that this was what Dad would have wanted. I backed down. Hated myself for it. August 3rd, Sarah's birthday dinner. James gave a toast about family, about how Dad had taught us to stick together, to take care of each other. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, but the wine tasted like acid in my mouth. The hypocrisy was staggering. Reading back through these entries now, I can see how close I was to breaking. How the pressure was building, how I was documenting not just his behavior, but my own rage, my own growing determination to do something about this. I also started doing research. Late at night when I couldn't sleep anyway because of the headaches and the rage and the grief, I would sit at my computer and learn about estate law and fiduciary duty and elder financial abuse. That last term hit me hard. Elder financial abuse. I was 62 years old, and my own brother had been abusing me financially for years. There's a statistic I came across that I'll never forget. Research shows that multidisciplinary teams greatly increase convictions in these cases. That meant I needed help. Real help, not just my own confused investigation. I needed lawyers and accountants and maybe even law enforcement. But where do you even start with something like that? Who do you trust when the person who betrayed you was the one you trusted most? The answer came from the most unexpected place. I was at the community center near my apartment one Saturday, half-heartedly looking at a flyer about a yoga class I'd never actually attend when this woman approached me. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and sensible shoes, and she asked me if I needed help finding anything. I almost said no. Almost gave her my automatic response, the one that kept people at a distance. But something about her face, or maybe something about my own desperation, made me tell the truth. I think my brother has been stealing from me, I said, and I don't know what to do about it. Her expression didn't change to pity or shock. Instead, she nodded, like I'd just confirmed something she already suspected about the world. "Come with me," she said. "I want to show you something." She led me to a small room in the back of the community center where a support group was meeting. Adult children of aging parents, the sign said, caregivers and family members dealing with financial stress. I almost turned around. This wasn't me. I wasn't someone who needed a support group. Except I was. I absolutely was. That's where I met them. Other people who'd been betrayed by family members. Other people who'd spent years ignoring warning signs because acknowledging them would mean facing an unbearable truth. Other people who'd sacrificed their own well-being, their own peace of mind, their own health to maintain family unity. I wasn't alone. That realization hit me so hard I started crying right there in that fluorescent-lit room with strangers. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I wasn't wrong to feel hurt and angry and betrayed. A woman named Patricia, who was maybe 10 years older than me, squeezed my hand. "What's your next step?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I could find one. The woman who'd brought me to the group was named Helen, and she became something I'd never really had before. A real friend, someone who wasn't connected to my family, someone who could see my situation clearly. She worked at the community center, but she'd also been through something similar with her own father's estate. She knew the landscape. "You need documentation," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "Everything you can find. Bank statements, property records, the original trust documents, everything. James has most of that, I said. Then you need to get copies through official channels. The bank, the county recorder's office, anywhere that keeps records independently. She paused. And Claire, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that it's worse than you think. She was right. It was so much worse. With Helen's help, I started collecting evidence systematically. I requested account histories from the bank, citing my status as a beneficiary. The first time I walked into that bank and asked for records, my voice was shaking so badly the teller asked if I was all right. I wasn't all right. I was terrified. What if they refused me? What if they called James? What if this whole thing blew up before I was ready? But the teller, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair and a sympathetic smile, just asked for my identification and beneficiary documentation. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a stack of papers that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. Not sad tears, not yet. These were different. Relief, maybe, or determination, or just the physical release of months of tension finally finding an outlet. When I could breathe normally again, I drove to a coffee shop across town, somewhere I knew I wouldn't run into anyone from my family, and I started reading. Every transaction, every transfer, every withdrawal. There were patterns I hadn't seen in that single misdirected statement. Regular payments to companies I'd never heard of. Transfers between accounts that seemed designed to obscure the trail. Withdrawals that happened right after deposits from property sales. I made notes in the margins, cross-referenced dates, tried to make sense of the financial shell game James had been playing. My nursing brain, trained to track symptoms and identify patterns in patient care, clicked into a different mode. This was a diagnosis, just a different kind. And the diagnosis was clear: systematic theft over an extended period. The next day, I went to the county recorder's office and pulled property records for every piece of real estate Dad had owned. There had been 3 rental properties in addition to the family home. James had told me they'd been sold to simplify the estate, that the money had been reinvested in more liquid assets that would be easier to distribute when the time came. Lies. All lies. The properties had been sold, all right. 2 of them had gone for well above market value, which should have meant a substantial windfall for the estate. But the money hadn't been reinvested. It had been transferred to one of those mysterious companies I'd seen in the bank records. A company that, according to the state business registry I checked next, had been incorporated by James just months before Dad died. He'd been planning this. For months, maybe years, he'd been setting up the infrastructure to steal from his own family. I found copies of the original trust documents that Dad had filed with his attorney, documents that spelled out exactly how his estate was supposed to be divided. Equal shares. That's what Dad had wanted. James and I were supposed to receive equal shares of everything. Instead, James had been paying himself an administrative fee of $5,000 a month for 5 years. He'd sold 2 properties that should have been split between us and kept all the proceeds. He'd created something called management contracts that funneled money from the trust into a company he'd set up, a company that existed only on paper. The total, when I finally forced myself to calculate it, was devastating. Over $400,000. Money that should have been mine, money that Dad had worked his whole life to save, money that was supposed to take care of me. Gone. I spent a whole weekend after that discovery just sitting in my apartment, not crying anymore, just feeling this vast emptiness where my trust used to be. My headaches had gotten so bad my doctor wanted to run tests, thinking it might be something neurological. But I knew what it was. It was stress. It was rage. It was my body trying to process a betrayal so complete it had physical symptoms. I remember calling in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor, a woman I'd worked with for over a decade, was immediately concerned. "Claire, you never call in sick. What's wrong?" I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Not while I was still building my case, still trying to figure out my next move. So I said something vague about a stomach bug and promised I'd be back in a few days. Those few days turned into a week. I barely left my apartment. I ordered food delivery for the first time in my life because I couldn't face going to the grocery store and potentially running into someone I knew. I let my phone ring and ring, ignoring calls from James, from other family members, from concerned friends. I was in a cocoon, and I needed to stay there until I was ready to emerge as something different. Someone who could fight back. Helen checked on me. Thank God. She showed up at my door with soup and bread and just sat with me while I stared at the wall. She didn't push me to talk, didn't demand explanations. She just was there, a solid presence in a world that had become unmoored. "You're grieving," she said finally. "You're grieving the brother you thought you had, the family you thought you were part of. That's real, and it's valid, and you need to let yourself feel it." She was right. I was grieving, but I was also getting angry. Really, truly angry in a way I'd never allowed myself to be before. Have you ever ignored your own pain for so long that you forgot what feeling good was like? That's where I'd been for years. Decades, maybe. I'd normalized the headaches, the sleeplessness, the constant low-level anxiety. I told myself it was just part of getting older, part of being responsible, part of being the kind of person who takes care of others. But it wasn't. It was the cost of betraying myself, of ignoring every instinct that told me something was wrong, of choosing family peace over my own well-being. I made an appointment with an attorney, not someone James knew, not someone from our family's social circle, a lawyer who specialized in estate disputes and elder abuse. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she was terrifyingly competent. The first meeting was in her downtown office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I felt out of place in my nurse's practical clothes, sitting across from this polished professional in her designer suit. But when I started explaining what had happened, when I laid out my evidence on her expensive conference table, her expression never wavered between sympathy and steel-cold calculation. "This is a clear-cut case," she told me after reviewing my evidence. "Your brother violated his fiduciary duty in multiple ways. The fake contracts alone are probably criminal fraud." Criminal? The word felt too big, too serious. He created false documents to steal from an estate he was supposed to be protecting. Yes, that's criminal. She looked at me over her glasses. "The question is, what do you want to happen here?" What did I want? Revenge felt too simple. Justice felt too abstract. What I wanted was my life back, the life I would have had if my brother hadn't been systematically robbing me, the security Dad had wanted me to have, the peace of mind I deserved. "I want him to face consequences," I said. "Real consequences." Margaret nodded. "Then we have work to do." Over the next month, we built the case. Margaret brought in a forensic accountant, a man named David who looked like he should be teaching math at a community college, but who could read financial statements like they were telling him stories. He traced every transaction, documented every irregularity. We found more than I'd even suspected. Shell companies, forged signatures, backdated documents. "Your brother is sophisticated," David told me during one of our meetings. "These aren't the fumbling of an amateur. He understood exactly what he was doing and how to hide it. If you hadn't gotten that misdirected bank statement, if you hadn't started asking questions, he probably could have continued indefinitely." James had been sophisticated about it. I'll give him that. If I'd been the type to actually look at financial statements, if I'd been the type to ask questions, he probably would have been caught years ago. But he'd counted on me being exactly who I'd always been. Trusting, passive, afraid of conflict. The realization of how well he'd known me, how thoroughly he'd exploited my personality, made me feel violated in a way that went beyond the financial theft. He'd weaponized my own character traits against me. During this time, I started attending the support group regularly. Twice a week, I'd sit in that fluorescent-lit room and listen to other people's stories, and I'd share pieces of mine. There was something profoundly healing about being witnessed, about having people nod in understanding instead of trying to minimize what had happened or suggest I was overreacting. One evening, a man named Robert shared that his daughter had drained his retirement account. He was 78, and he'd trusted her completely. "The worst part," he said, his voice breaking, "is that I still love her. How do you stop loving someone just because they hurt you?" The room was silent. Because we all knew. We all understood that impossible contradiction of loving someone who'd betrayed us, of grieving for a relationship that had maybe never been what we thought it was. "You don't stop loving them," Patricia said gently, "but you learn to love yourself more." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. Learning to love myself more. What did that even look like for someone who'd spent 6 decades putting everyone else first? The support group became my lifeline in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I'd drive to that community center and spend 2 hours with people who truly understood. We were all different ages, different backgrounds, different circumstances. But we shared this common wound, the betrayal by someone we'd loved and trusted. There was Margaret. Not my lawyer, but a different Margaret, a retired teacher whose son had forged her signature on a reverse mortgage. There was Kenneth, whose wife had emptied their accounts and disappeared with her personal trainer. There was young Jasmine, only 35, whose mother had stolen her identity and ruined her credit. We didn't just share our stories. We shared strategies. Patricia taught me how to spot manipulation tactics I'd been blind to for years. Kenneth showed me how to set up alerts on my financial accounts. Jasmine, despite being half my age, had wisdom about boundaries that I desperately needed to hear. "The hardest part," Jasmine said one evening, "is accepting that they knew what they were doing. We want to believe it was a mistake, that they didn't understand how much they were hurting us. But they knew. They chose to do it anyway." That hit me hard. James had known. Every time he'd patted my shoulder and told me not to worry, every time he'd reassured me the estate was being handled properly, every time he'd deflected my questions, he'd known exactly what he was doing. The theft wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a choice he made over and over again for 5 years. Understanding that changed something fundamental in how I saw the situation. This wasn't about family loyalty or sibling dynamics or different interpretations of Dad's wishes. This was about right and wrong. And what James had done was unequivocally, undeniably wrong. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. My niece Sarah, the one who'd gotten engaged at that backyard party, reached out to me one evening. She wanted to meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. And something in her voice made me agree even though I was trying to avoid family gatherings. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, and she looked nervous. "Aunt Claire," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to hate me." "I could never hate you, sweetheart." "Dad has been lying about something." She pulled out her phone, hands shaking. "I found these emails on his computer. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was just looking for a recipe he said he'd scanned, but I saw your name and I—" She stopped, took a breath. "You need to see these." The emails were between James and Linda, discussing how to handle me if I ever started asking questions. There were strategies, talking points, ways to make me feel guilty for even wondering about the money. Linda had written, "Claire has always been easy to manage. Just remind her that family comes first and she'll back down." I read that line 3 times. Easy to manage. That's what I'd been to them. Not a sister. Not a person with rights and feelings and legitimate claims. Just someone to manage. There were other emails too. One where James joked about how I'd probably never figure out what was happening because I was too busy playing Florence Nightingale to care about money. Another where Linda worried that I might get a financial advisor someday, and James responded, "Not a chance. Claire thinks being interested in money is beneath her." He'd studied me, analyzed my weaknesses, exploited them methodically. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, and I realized my hands were shaking. "I'm going to be," I said. "Thank you for showing me this. You're very brave." "I hate that he did this to you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You've always been so good to all of us." "Sarah, I need you to understand something." I took her hand. "What your father did is his responsibility, not yours. You don't have to choose between us, and you don't have to feel guilty for exposing the truth. You did the right thing." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure he can't do this to anyone else," I said. That night I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. Really looked, not just the quick glance you do when you brush your teeth. I saw a woman who'd spent 62 years making herself small to make other people comfortable. I saw the lines stress had carved into my face, the way I held my shoulders up near my ears like I was perpetually bracing for impact. I saw someone who'd forgotten how to fight because she'd been told for so long that fighting wasn't her place. But it was my place now. It had to be. Margaret and I strategized about the confrontation. She advised against it initially, suggesting we go straight to law enforcement and let the legal system handle it. But I insisted. I needed James to know that I knew, that I'd seen through his manipulation, that I was no longer the easy-to-manage little sister. "I understand the impulse," Margaret said during one of our planning sessions. "You want him to see you standing up for yourself. You want him to know you're not the person he thought he could control forever. But Claire, a public confrontation could backfire. He might become defensive, aggressive. He could try to turn the family against you even more than they might already be inclined to." "Let him try," I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. I've spent my whole life being afraid of making scenes, of causing discomfort, of disrupting family harmony. And where did that get me? It got me stolen from. I'm done being afraid of other people's reactions. Margaret studied me for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "If you're going to do this, do it smart. Choose a public setting where there are witnesses. Document everything. And Claire?" She looked at me seriously. "Be prepared for him to get ugly. When people like your brother are cornered, they don't usually go quietly." We spent hours preparing. Margaret coached me on how to stay calm if James became confrontational, how to redirect if he tried to make it about my supposed incompetence rather than his theft. We practiced responses to common deflection tactics. "He'll try to make you the villain," she warned. "He'll say you're ungrateful, that you're tearing the family apart over money, that you've misunderstood everything. Don't let him control the narrative." I practiced in front of my mirror at home, saying the words over and over until they felt natural. "You stole from me. You violated your fiduciary duty. You forged documents and created fake companies to steal money that Dad wanted me to have." Simple statements, undeniable facts, no room for his spin. The night before the graduation party, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, though there was some of that. Mostly I lay awake feeling this strange sense of anticipation. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would stop being silent. Tomorrow, I would choose myself over family peace for the first time in my life. Was I scared? Absolutely. But I was also more certain than I'd ever been about anything. This was right. This was necessary. This was my line in the sand. The backyard where it all came to a head was the same one where Sarah's engagement party had been. Another family gathering, this time for my nephew's graduation. James was there with Linda, playing the role of proud father and successful businessman. I watched him laugh and tell stories, and all I could see was a thief in a nice shirt. I'd coordinated with Margaret beforehand. The plan was simple. I was going to confront him in front of everyone. I was going to lay out the evidence, piece by piece, and watch him try to explain it away. You might think that's cruel, that I should have done it privately, given him a chance to confess, worked it out within the family. But here's the thing about people who betray you systematically over years. They don't deserve your discretion. They don't deserve your protection of their reputation. They made their choices. Now I was making mine. I waited until most people had food on their plates, until everyone was settled and comfortable. Then I stood up and cleared my throat. The conversations died down gradually, everyone turning to look at me with varying degrees of curiosity. Claire doesn't usually speak up at these things. I could see them thinking, this should be interesting. I need to say something, I started, and my voice was steadier than I'd expected. James, I know what you've been doing. His face went pale, but he recovered quickly. What are you talking about, Claire? I'm talking about the $400,000 you've stolen from Dad's estate over the past 5 years. I pulled out a folder from my bag. I'm talking about the fake management contracts and the unauthorized property sales and the administrative fees you paid yourself while telling me there wasn't enough money for me to have more than a basic stipend. The backyard was completely silent now. People had stopped eating. Linda had her hand on James's arm, her face frozen in horror. Claire, this isn't the time or place. James started, but I cut him off. No, this is exactly the time and place. This is family, right? And you've been telling me for years that family is everything, that loyalty is everything, that I need to trust you because you're my big brother and you know what's best. I laid out the documents on the table, one by one. Bank statements, property records, the emails Sarah had found. Each one was a nail in the coffin of his lies. Did you know, I said, looking not at James but at everyone else, that global studies estimate that 142 million seniors worldwide suffer from some form of abuse? I didn't know that. I had to look it up when I realized I was one of them. That my own brother had been financially abusing me for years while I smiled and brought potato salad to family parties. James stood up, his face red now instead of pale. This is insane. You're making wild accusations based on documents you don't even understand. Then explain them to me, I said calmly. Explain the management contracts to a company that doesn't exist. Explain the property sales where I never saw a dime. Explain telling Linda in an email that I was easy to manage as long as you reminded me that family comes first. That last one hit him visibly. He looked at Sarah, who was crying now, and he must have realized where I'd gotten that information. You've been stealing from me, I said, and I've spent the last 2 months documenting everything you've done. I have lawyers. I have forensic accountants. And as of this morning, I have a court order freezing every account connected to Dad's estate. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then everything happened at once. Linda started yelling about how ungrateful I was, how dare I make such accusations, how I'd always been jealous of James's success. My sister-in-law was trying to get her kids away from the table, not wanting them to witness this family implosion. Sarah was sobbing openly, torn between her father and the truth she'd helped reveal. And James was just staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe the Claire he'd known, the one who never made waves, who always put family first, who could be managed with a few careful words. Maybe she'd never really existed. Or maybe she'd died somewhere between finding that bank statement and standing in front of the mirror deciding she'd had enough. You'll regret this, James said, his voice low and threatening. Family doesn't turn on family like this. No, I agreed. They don't, which is why what you did was so unforgivable. He took a step toward me, and for a moment I thought he might actually get physical. But my nephew, Sarah's brother Tom, stepped between us. Dad, don't. Just don't. You don't understand, James said, and I couldn't tell if he was talking to Tom or to me or to everyone there. I was managing the estate. Someone had to make decisions. Claire never wanted to be involved. Because you told me not to be. The words came out louder than I'd intended, raw with years of suppressed anger. You told me it was too complicated, that I should just trust you, that you were protecting me. You weaponized my trust. You used my love for this family against me. I was protecting the estate. You were stealing. I was shaking now, not with fear, but with the sheer force of finally speaking my truth. You created fake companies. You forged documents. You sold properties and kept the money. You violated every fiduciary duty you had. And you did it while making me feel like I was the problem, like my financial struggles were my own fault, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps you decided to give me. That's when someone must have called the police. Or maybe Margaret had arranged for them to be there. I never found out for sure. But suddenly, there were officers in the backyard, and they were asking to speak with James Patterson regarding allegations of financial fraud and elder abuse. The next few minutes were chaos. Linda was screaming about lawyers and false accusations. James was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Other family members were pulling me aside, asking me if I was sure about this, if I understood what I was doing to the family. I understand perfectly, I told my aunt, my mother's sister, who'd always favored James. I'm protecting myself, something I should have done years ago. Watching my brother be led away, not in handcuffs but accompanied by officers who wanted to ask him some questions downtown, I felt a lot of things: vindication, grief, relief, rage. But mostly, I felt tired. So tired. Not the exhaustion I'd been carrying for years, the weight of pretending and ignoring and managing everyone else's feelings. A different kind of tired. The kind that comes after you fought a battle you didn't want to fight but had no choice about. The family scattered after that. Some people took James's side, convinced I'd misunderstood or overreacted, or was just being vindictive. My uncle, Dad's brother, actually called me a week later and suggested I was having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of losing both parents had made me paranoid. I have documentation, I told him. Bank records, property records, emails. This isn't paranoia, it's evidence. He hung up on me. We haven't spoken since. Others reached out to me privately, apologizing for not seeing it, for not speaking up, for not protecting me the way family should. Sarah's mother, James's ex-wife from his first marriage, sent me a long email about how she'd suspected financial irregularities during their divorce but hadn't been able to prove anything. He's very good at hiding things, she wrote. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. I didn't need their apologies. I needed them to understand that what happened to me could happen to anyone who valued peace over truth, who chose loyalty over justice, who believed that keeping the family together was more important than protecting themselves. The legal process was grueling. James fought every step, hired expensive lawyers, tried to paint me as mentally unstable and financially incompetent. His attorney actually suggested in court that my advanced age and lack of financial sophistication meant I couldn't properly understand the estate documents I'd signed. That argument made me angrier than almost anything else in this whole ordeal. The implication that being 62 and working in healthcare rather than finance made me incompetent, that my gender and my caring profession somehow meant I couldn't understand theft when I saw it. It was insulting on so many levels. Margaret eviscerated that argument. She presented testimony from my employer about my competence as a nurse, about the complex medical decisions I made daily. She showed the court my meticulous documentation, my systematic approach to gathering evidence. She made it clear that I wasn't some confused elderly woman, but a capable adult who'd been systematically defrauded. Ms. Patterson, Margaret said during one of her arguments, managed complex patient care for over 40 years. She calculated medication dosages, monitored vital signs, made split-second decisions in emergencies. The suggestion that she's somehow incapable of reading a bank statement is not only false, it's offensive. What we're dealing with here isn't confusion on her part. It's calculated deception on her brother's part. The proceedings dragged on for months. There were depositions where I had to sit across from James and answer questions from his lawyers, who tried to twist every response, to make me seem vindictive or greedy or unstable. There were meetings with investigators from Adult Protective Services. There were court dates that got postponed, rescheduled, postponed again. During one particularly brutal deposition, James's attorney asked me if I'd ever been treated for mental illness. The question was designed to rattle me, to suggest I was unstable. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm currently in therapy to deal with the trauma of being financially abused by my brother. Does that count?" His face turned red, and Margaret actually smiled. There were moments during those months when I wanted to give up, when the fight felt too hard, the cost too high, when I wondered if maybe everyone else was right. Maybe I should have just let it go. Maybe family peace was worth more than money or justice or pride. But then I'd remember the emails. Easy to manage. That phrase echoed in my head during every difficult moment. Every time I wanted to back down, I'd think about Linda writing those words, about James reading them and agreeing. I'd think about how they'd sat around discussing the best way to manipulate me, and my resolve would harden again. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fake contracts, the unauthorized transactions, the emails planning how to manipulate me, it was all there in black and white. David, the forensic accountant, testified about the shell companies and the money trail. Margaret presented case law about fiduciary duty and what constituted breach of trust. James's lawyers tried to argue that he'd been acting in the estate's best interest, that his fees were reasonable for the work he'd done. But they couldn't explain the fake companies. They couldn't justify the property sales where I'd received nothing. They couldn't explain away his own emails about keeping me manageable. 6 months after that confrontation in the backyard, James accepted a plea deal. He paid back everything he'd stolen, plus penalties. He lost his professional license. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation and community service. His reputation in our community was destroyed. The judge, a woman probably close to my age, looked at him sternly during sentencing. "You betrayed a family member who trusted you completely. You exploited your position as trustee to enrich yourself. This kind of elder financial abuse is particularly egregious because it targets the very relationships that should provide safety and security." I watched James's face during that speech. I wanted to see remorse, some acknowledgement of what he'd done. Instead, I saw resentment. Even then, even after everything, he still thought he was the victim. Some people told me I should feel bad about that I'd ruined his life. But here's what I learned. You can't ruin someone's life by holding them accountable for their choices. James ruined his own life when he decided that stealing from his sister was acceptable. I just refused to keep his secrets anymore. The money helped, of course. With the $400,000 returned to me, plus the proper distribution of what was left in the estate, I had financial security I'd never experienced before. I paid off my mortgage. I set up a real retirement account. I took a trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but never thought I could afford. When I told Helen I was planning the Italy trip, she insisted on helping me plan it. We spent evenings poring over guidebooks and travel blogs, mapping out an itinerary that took me from Rome to Florence to Venice. I'd never traveled internationally before, never felt like I had the money or the time or the permission to do something so self-indulgent. "This isn't self-indulgent," Helen said when I voiced that thought. "This is you reclaiming your life. This is you using your own money, money that was always rightfully yours, to do something that brings you joy. There's nothing indulgent about that. It's just living." The trip was transformative. Standing in front of the Colosseum, eating gelato while watching the sunset over the Arno River, getting lost in the narrow streets of Venice, these weren't just tourist experiences. They were proof that I had a life beyond what had been done to me, beyond my role as the reliable nurse or the easy-to-manage sister. I was Claire. A woman who could navigate foreign cities and order coffee in broken Italian and make decisions about how to spend her own money and her own time. I sent Sarah a postcard from Florence. Just a few lines about the Uffizi Gallery and the incredible pasta I'd had for dinner. She texted me back immediately. "Aunt Claire, I'm so happy you're doing this. You deserve every moment of it." Her words made me cry a little, sitting there in my hotel room with the windows open to the Florentine night. Not sad tears, grateful tears, for Sarah's support, for Helen's friendship, for my own courage in taking this trip, for everything that had led me to this moment. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was something quieter, something that happened gradually over the months that followed. I stopped getting headaches. I started sleeping through the night. I looked in the mirror and recognized the person looking back at me. I said no to things I didn't want to do, and the world didn't end. I built relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not who they needed me to be. The support group Helen had introduced me to became a regular part of my life. I met people there who understood what betrayal felt like, who didn't judge me for taking so long to see the truth, who celebrated my healing journey as much as I celebrated theirs. The group evolved into something more than just a support network. We became friends, real friends who got together outside of meetings. We'd have dinner at each other's houses, go to movies, celebrate birthdays and holidays together. Patricia introduced me to her book club. Kenneth invited me to join his hiking group. These were people who knew my story, who'd witnessed my lowest moments, and who chose to be in my life anyway. And Helen? She became the kind of friend I'd never had before. The kind who tells you the truth even when it's uncomfortable, who supports you without trying to fix you, who shows up just because she cares. We have a standing coffee date every Sunday morning. We talk about everything: her work at the community center, my shifts at the hospital, books we're reading, movies we've seen, plans for the future. Sometimes we talk about what happened with James, but more often we don't. It's no longer the defining feature of my life. It's something that happened to me, something I survived and grew from, but it's not who I am. "You know what I love about you?" Helen said one Sunday morning, out of nowhere. "You never became bitter. After everything he did, you could have turned hard and cynical. But you didn't. You turned toward healing instead." I thought about that. I was bitter for a while, I admitted. Angry and bitter and determined to make him pay. But staying in that space would have meant he was still controlling my life, still taking things from me. I chose to focus on rebuilding instead. "That takes real strength," she said. "A lot of people never make that choice." Maybe she was right. Or maybe I just got lucky, finding the right support at the right time. Either way, I was grateful for where I'd ended up. One evening, about a year after everything happened, I was having dinner with Helen at her place. We were on her porch watching the sunset, and she asked me something I'd been thinking about a lot. "Do you regret it? Blowing everything up like that?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "I regret not doing it sooner. I regret all the years I spent making myself small. I regret putting loyalty to family above loyalty to myself. But confronting James, fighting back, that's the first thing I've done in years that I don't regret at all." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. You deserved better than what he gave you." "I deserved better than what I gave myself," I corrected her. "That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. Yes, other people hurt you. Yes, their actions are wrong and harmful and deserving of consequences. But sometimes the deepest betrayal is the one you commit against yourself when you ignore your instincts, silence your questions, and choose keeping the peace over protecting your well-being. I'd spent decades betraying myself in small ways that added up to a life I barely recognized, and it took my brother's theft to wake me up to that fact. The relationship with the rest of my family is complicated now. Sarah stayed in touch, apologizing constantly for her father's actions until I finally told her she wasn't responsible for his choices. My nephew reached out after a few months, cautiously rebuilding a connection. Others still won't speak to me, convinced I destroyed the family over money. Let them think that. I know the truth. I destroyed the illusion of family to save myself. And some days, that's enough. Some days, it's more than enough. I still work at the hospital, still do my 3 12-hour shifts a week. But now, when I'm there, I pay attention to the older patients in a way I never did before. I watch for signs of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, family members who seem a little too controlling. I speak up when something doesn't feel right. I make referrals to social workers and adult protective services. I use my experience to help protect other people. Just last month, I noticed something off about one of my patients, a sweet woman named Dorothy, who was 83. Her grandson was always there, always hovering, always asking about her finances and medications and insurance. Something about the dynamic reminded me of how James used to position himself as my protector, while actually being my predator. I watched them interact during Dorothy's hospital stay. The way her grandson would answer questions before she could. The way he'd pat her hand dismissively when she tried to speak. The way he positioned himself as the responsible family member taking care of poor, confused grandma. I'd seen this pattern before. I'd lived this pattern. During my break, I pulled up Dorothy's admission records. Her grandson had power of attorney. He'd been the one to bring her in for what he claimed was confusion and memory problems. But when I talked to Dorothy alone, she was sharp as a tack. She knew the date, the president's name, what she'd had for breakfast. She wasn't confused. She was scared. I pulled Dorothy aside during a quiet moment. "Is everything okay at home?" I asked. "With your grandson?" She looked surprised, then wary. "Of course. Why do you ask?" "Because I've been where you might be," I said gently. "And I want you to know that if something doesn't feel right, if you have questions about your money or your care or anything else, there are people who can help." Her eyes filled with tears. "He's taking my Social Security checks," she whispered. "Says he's managing my money, but I never see any of it. He says I'm too old to understand finances, that I should be grateful he's taking care of everything. But I'm not confused. I know what's happening. I just don't know how to stop it." My heart broke for her, because I'd felt exactly what she was feeling. That terrible combination of knowing you're being wronged but feeling powerless to stop it, being told you're the problem when you try to speak up. "You're not confused," I told her firmly, "and you're not powerless. What he's doing is illegal, and there are people who can help you stop it." I connected her with a social worker that same day. I made sure Dorothy had the contact information written down somewhere her grandson couldn't find it. I documented my observations in her chart, noting the discrepancy between her grandson's claims of confusion and her actual mental state. Last I heard, her grandson was under investigation, and Dorothy was working with a court-appointed advocate to regain control of her finances. She sent me a thank you card a few weeks after her discharge. "You saw me," she wrote. "When everyone else believed him, you saw me. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up." I keep that card in my locker at work. It reminds me why going through all of this mattered. Not just for me, but for every Dorothy out there who needs someone to believe them, to see them, to validate that what they're experiencing is real and wrong. Because here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to take away from my story. Recovery is possible, but you have to have a plan. You have to take real, concrete steps to get out and rebuild. First, document everything. I cannot stress this enough. Bank statements, emails, text messages, receipts, anything that shows a pattern of what's happening. Keep copies somewhere safe, somewhere the person who's harming you can't access. I used a safe deposit box, but you could use a trusted friend's house, a cloud storage account they don't know about, anywhere secure. Second, tell someone. Break the silence. I know how hard that is, especially when it's family, especially when you've been conditioned to keep things private. But isolation is how abuse continues. When I finally told Helen what was happening, when I walked into that support group, everything changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but it changed. Find your people. They're out there. Third, get professional help. I needed lawyers and accountants and therapists. You might need different professionals depending on your situation, but you will need help. This isn't something you can or should do alone. Margaret and her team were essential to my case. Without them, I might have confronted James, but I wouldn't have had the evidence to back it up, the legal framework to hold him accountable. Fourth, prepare for pushback. When you speak up, when you fight back, people will try to silence you. They'll say you're overreacting, misremembering, causing drama, destroying the family. James tried all of those, so did some of my other relatives. You have to be ready for that resistance and refuse to let it stop you. Fifth, take care of your health. The stress of betrayal and the fight for justice takes a physical toll. I ignored my headaches for years, and they got progressively worse until I finally dealt with the source of the stress. Get medical care. See a therapist. Do whatever you need to do to support your body and mind through this process. Sixth, build new connections. One of the hardest things about confronting family betrayal is that you often lose relationships in the process. Some people will choose the abuser over you, and that's devastating. But you can build new relationships, healthier ones, with people who value honesty and respect and mutual care. The support group, Helen, new friends I've made through community activities, these people have become my chosen family. Seventh, and this is crucial, understand that justice might not look the way you expect. James faced legal consequences, but not everyone does. Sometimes the justice is purely internal, the knowledge that you spoke up, that you stopped participating in your own abuse, that you chose yourself. That has to be enough because it's all you can control. And finally, know that there's no timeline for healing. A year out, I'm doing so much better than I was, but I'm not done healing. I still have moments of grief for the family I thought I had, for the brother I thought James was, for the years I lost to his manipulation. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated and ongoing. If you're in a situation like mine, if you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, please know you're not alone. The statistics I mentioned earlier, about 142 million seniors suffering abuse worldwide. That's not just a number. That's 142 million people, each with their own story of betrayal and survival. You're part of something much larger than yourself. And if you're not in this situation, but you know someone who might be, speak up. Don't wait for them to ask for help. Offer support. Provide resources. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong. The people around me who made the biggest difference weren't the ones who waited for me to figure it out. They were the ones like Helen who saw something and reached out. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I wish someone had taught me decades ago. It's about recognizing abuse patterns early, before they've had years to entrench themselves in your life. Financial abuse, especially in families, follows predictable patterns. If someone in your life is doing these things, pay attention. They control access to financial information, insisting they need to manage everything because it's too complicated for you to understand. That's what James did with the estate. He positioned himself as the expert and me as the grateful recipient of his management skills. They create financial dependence, often by convincing you to give up work or limit your income. I'd already chosen a helping profession that didn't pay much, but James reinforced that narrative by suggesting I didn't need to worry about money because the estate would take care of me. They isolate you from other sources of financial advice or information. If I'd had a financial advisor of my own, if I'd talked to other people about estate management, I might have discovered the theft years earlier. James made sure I believed he was the only person I needed to consult. They become defensive or angry when you ask questions about money. Every time I tried to understand the finances better, James would either deflect with complicated jargon or make me feel guilty for not trusting him. They use your love and loyalty against you, framing questions as lack of faith in the relationship. Don't you trust me? I'm your brother. I'm trying to protect you. That was James's favorite refrain. They create urgency or crisis to justify their control. James would occasionally mention issues with the estate that required immediate action only he could take, and I needed to trust his judgment. If you're experiencing these patterns, even in subtle ways, it's time to get an independent financial assessment. Talk to a certified financial planner who has no connection to the person controlling your finances. Request copies of all documents. Ask questions and don't accept dismissive answers. And here's something else I learned. Trust your body. Those headaches I kept dismissing, that constant stress I normalized, my body was trying to tell me something was wrong. Physical symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, sleep disturbances. These aren't just random occurrences. They're your body's way of flagging that something in your life needs attention. I ignored those signals for years because I'd been taught that physical discomfort was less important than emotional loyalty, that I should push through pain to maintain relationships, that my well-being was secondary to family harmony. That was wrong. Your body is giving you important information. Listen to it. For those of you who are in helping professions like I am, or who naturally take care of others, you're particularly vulnerable to this kind of abuse. We're taught to put others first, to sacrifice our needs, to find fulfillment in service. Those are beautiful qualities, but they can be exploited by people who recognize them and use them against us. You can be a caring person and still protect yourself. You can value family and still hold people accountable. You can want peace and still fight for justice. These things aren't contradictory. They're necessary complements. One more thing I want to address specifically. The shame. If you're in a situation like this, you probably feel ashamed that you didn't see it sooner, didn't act faster, didn't protect yourself better. I know I did. I kept thinking about all the warning signs I'd missed, all the times I could have spoken up but didn't. Let me be clear. The shame belongs to the abuser, not the victim. James should be ashamed of what he did. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I trusted my brother because that's what siblings are supposed to do. I wanted to believe the best of him because that's what family relationships should allow. The fact that he violated that trust isn't a reflection on my judgment. It's a reflection on his character. If you're blaming yourself for being victimized, please stop. Redirect that energy toward action instead. That's what I did, and it made all the difference. Okay, I'm almost done. Just a few more thoughts before I finish this story. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was long, and I know parts of it were probably hard to hear. But I hope it helps someone out there who's struggling with something similar. I hope it gives you the courage to speak up, to ask questions, to protect yourself even when it means disrupting the peace. I'm curious, what city are you listening from, and what time is it there? For me, it's late evening in Phoenix, and I'm sitting on my own porch now, in the house I was able to keep because I fought for what was mine. The air is cooling down after another hot day, and I can hear my neighbor's wind chimes in the breeze. This is my life now. Peaceful, secure, mine. If my story resonated with you, if you felt that recognition in your gut that comes from seeing your experience reflected back at you, please leave a like. It helps other people find this story who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted James publicly, or would you have handled it differently? I'm genuinely curious about your perspectives, and I read every comment. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing. Every week there are stories like mine, stories of people who found the courage to fight back, to speak up, to reclaim their lives. We're building a community here of survivors and supporters, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Before you go, I want to suggest a couple of other videos you might find helpful. There's one about recognizing gaslighting in family relationships and another about rebuilding your life after family estrangement. Both of those touched on issues I dealt with during my journey, and I found them incredibly validating. So that's my story. The story of how I went from being easy to manage to being impossible to silence. The story of how I chose myself over keeping the peace. The story of how I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect and honesty and genuine care. It's about people who see you, who value you, who would never dream of exploiting your trust. James doesn't have those things to give. But I do, and I'm giving them to myself now. Every single day, I make that choice. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect it fiercely. Defend it loudly and without apology. Because you deserve people in your life who value you as much as you value them. And if you don't have those people right now, keep looking. They're out there. I found them. You will too.